Good evening and welcome to Holy Cross, and welcome to our parish time of renewal. Again this evening we are pleased to have Father William Graff as our presenter. Father Graff holds a doctorate from Columbia Pacific University, and he's presently the chairperson of the Department of Religious Studies at St. John Fisher College. During this time of renewal, we are invited to join in prayer. We rekindle our faith, revitalize our spirits, and as Father Graff said last evening, discover how and where God is calling to us. Let us begin by joining in our opening hymn, number 700. It's in our green hymnals in the pews. The summons, verses 1, 4, and 5. That's number 700, verses 1, 4, and 5. Opening prayer. God, our loving Father, pour out on us the gifts of your Holy Spirit. Open our ears to hear your word. Open our eyes to see your presence. Open our minds to understand your wisdom. And open our hearts to be more available for your mission, so that, strengthened by your grace, we can truly be a sign and an instrument of your presence in our whole world today. Help us always to know your will. Give us the courage we need to accept your will and the wisdom to know that we can accomplish nothing without you. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Our first reading is from the second letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. Since then, we have the same spirit of faith according to what is written. I believe, therefore I spoke. We too believe and therefore speak, knowing that the one who raised the Lord Jesus will raise us also with Jesus and place us with you in his presence. Everything indeed is for you, so that the grace bestowed in abundance and more people may cause the thanksgiving to flow for the glory of God. Therefore, we are not discouraged. Rather, although our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not at what is seen, but to what is unseen. For what is seen is transitory, but what is unseen is eternal. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Our next song will be number 598, Center of My Life, number 598 in the Green Books.
Center of my life, I will always praise you, I will always serve you, I will always keep you in my sight. Oh Lord, you are the center of my life, I will always praise you, I will always serve you, I will always keep you in my sight. Keep me safe, O God, I take refuge in you. I say to the Lord, you are my God. My happiness lies in you alone. My happiness lies in you alone. Oh Lord, you are the center of my life. I will always praise you. I will always serve you. I will always keep you in my sight. I will bless the Lord who gives me counsel, who even at night directs my heart. I keep the Lord ever in my sight. Since he is at my right hand, I shall stand firm. Oh Lord, you are the center of my life. I will always praise you. I will always serve you. I will always keep you in my sight. And so my heart rejoices, my soul is glad. Even in safety shall my body rest. For you will not leave my soul among the dead, nor let your beloved know decay. Oh Lord, you are the center of my life. I will always praise you. I will always serve you. I will always keep you in my sight. You will show me the path of life, the fullness of joy in your presence. At your right hand, at your right hand, happiness forever. Oh Lord, you are the center of my life. I will always praise you. I will always serve you. I will always keep you in my sight.
Thanks for coming out this evening.
just to continue our journey that we began last night when we talked about faith and how it calls us to make a response. Because faith is something we can talk about, it's something that we can pray about, it's something that we can read in a book, but living that faith with all of our heart, making God the center of our lives, it's a tremendous amount of work. And so tonight, just the way in which you and I can live our faith. And I was trying to think if I were to come up with a word about how do you and I live our faith, it's in one word: discipleship. And basically, discipleship is holding on to the person of Jesus. That we see this Jesus as someone who's offering us something. He's making us a gift. And we can talk about all the wonderful gifts that he gave us and continues to give us. But what I'd like to suggest more than anything else, that the greatest gift that you and I can give anybody is the gift of ourselves. And I really believe that even in a relationship, a human relationship, a husband and wife give of themselves completely to each other. And the amazing thing is, it's not that we just give all the good part of us, the smiling, kind, gentle, thoughtful, ever-present type of personality, and we're there for them. Not just that kind of outward type of gift of self, but the gift of our own sinfulness and our dark side. It's very easy to love a smiling, helpful person, but it's very difficult to love and accept someone who irritates us or is hurtful or causes us distress. So just humanly speaking, that the gift of who we are to one another is the gift of the totality of who we are. And Jesus, of course, was without sin. And so when he gives us the gift of himself, and he asks us to be part of that, it causes us to want to respond in some way. And so when we think of discipleship, it's adhering to this Jesus who gave himself. And it's also the invitation to accept that summons. Will you come and follow me? And following his way of life. And I don't know whether you've ever thought about it, but you and I are all theologians. We don't necessarily have to go to a school and become a theologian with a degree and study theology in some university. The word theologian is someone who speaks about God. And so all of us are theologians whenever we speak about God. And so what do we talk about? Well, when we speak about God, when we speak about Jesus, the one thing that we do very naturally is tell the stories about Jesus. And the stories that you and I grew up with. The stories of his willingness to spend time with the poor, spend time with those who wanted to eat at table with him, the time that he spent healing. We know all of those stories. In fact, sometimes on Sunday when we hear the gospel, we can almost tell you what it's going to be. And we know the ending, and we know perhaps what it means. But again, every time, sometimes we hear a story, we hear the same story, it might touch us in a different way. I'd like to have you think about that, because that's what brings us back year in and year out. I often think that, even if we hear the Christmas story, and for some who only hear that story in a worshiping community once a year. What brings them back every Christmas or every Easter? And I like to believe that somehow, in some way, they're searching for the meaning of that story in their life. And when you and I begin to talk about it in our daily existence, when we preach the gospel, not by trying to convince someone logically of the truths of our faith, but rather to convince someone of the beauty of Jesus by the way we live. And that's why for you and for me, living the way Jesus did. Now, we could talk about different ways, but I'd just like to point out a couple. First of all, his compassion. The willingness that Jesus had to be with people, to suffer with them, to engage where they were in their hurts. Remember the widow who was walking behind her son, who was a young son, perhaps a teenager, who had died. And can you imagine how, as we know from the story, that Jesus looked and there was a sadness about it. And he just couldn't let that funeral take place. He had to go over and say something, do something. And he probably could have said, well, my condolences, I'm sorry you lost your son, I'm sorry that you're a widow, I'm sorry that you're going to have some problems in the future, and you're not going to have a place to stay perhaps anymore because you have no one to support you. He could have said a lot of things, but what he did is he went over and he gave life to that young boy, who then was able to get up and take care of his mom, perhaps until the time she died. There was that action, that compassion that Jesus had for her. And in a way, it was saying to people around them, what were you doing? Were you just crying, or were you reaching out in a different way to help her? That sense of compassion. I really think that, if we were to bring a gift to the world, it would be the gift of compassion. That sense that in the original Hebrew, it meant it was like the love that a mom has for the baby that she is carrying within her womb. It's that womb-like love that causes the mom to walk maybe a little differently, or get more rest, or watch her diet, whatever it might be, because of that real care and concern for the life that she carries. That's what the word compassion means in the original Hebrew idea. I think that if I were to pick out anything that Jesus did that has touched me, and it's something I think we oftentimes forget, because we hear the stories of Jesus performing miracles. We have Jesus preaching wonderful sermons. We have Jesus challenging people and having arguments with the scribes and the Pharisees. But what I like most about Jesus that has struck me is his sense of hospitality. There was nobody that wasn't welcome into the life of Jesus. If you look through the stories of the New Testament, the gospel stories, I would say that you would probably conservatively find at least 20 times plus of Jesus eating and drinking. In fact, some of the scribes and Pharisees said, "You're a drunkard. You're one of these people that all you want to do is eat and drink." And Jesus says, but what else do you do with people to make them feel welcome? You eat and drink with them. I was thinking of that last night and yesterday morning when so many of you were gathered in the parish hall and just sitting around eating and drinking and enjoying each other's company. Well, that's hospitality. That's the kind of hospitality Jesus had. He welcomed the sinners. He just didn't sit with the good guys, but he sat with everybody. He sat with the tax collectors and the prostitutes. He sat with those who were public sinners, and he made them feel welcome. One of the scripture scholars pointed out, and I think this is what's had the influence on me, he said that for John the Baptist and for so many of the scribes and Pharisees, before you sat down and ate, you had to change your life. And for Jesus, it was you could sit down and eat, and I take you where you are. And I think maybe very quietly Jesus is saying, maybe if I make you feel welcome and let you see and witness your own dignity, maybe then you'll want to change. Maybe you will want to live a different life. Sometimes we want to welcome people into our life after they straighten out. Jesus was willing to reach into their life and welcome them into his life, not worrying about that. He took people where they are. That's hospitality. And it's a hospitality that it seems to me that we have to observe as if we're really serious about discipleship of adhering to Jesus and his story, then living out his way, then hospitality is important. And finally, if I were to come up with a third word of this way of Jesus, it is the word forgiveness. I remember going to the hospital one time, and I saw this man who was sort of moping around one of the hallways near the patients, where the different patients were in the different rooms, and he was sort of walking around, not in any particular way, but just moping and wondering. And I said, well, you look pretty down and out. He said, I am. And I said, well, what's up? He said, my brother's dying. He's over there in that room, and he's dying, and I'm really concerned. And I said, well, is he conscious? He said, well, I don't know for sure. I said, why? Is there something going on? Are the nurses in there? Oh, he said, no. He says, I haven't been in to see him. I said, really? He said, oh, no. He says, no, it's been 32 years. We haven't spoken to each other in 32 years. And I said, oh, and he said, he doesn't want to talk to me now, and I'd like to talk to him, but I don't know for sure whether he would welcome me into his room. And I said, well, gee, that's too bad. And he said, well, yeah. I said, what happened? And he said, well, he says, my mom died 32 years ago, and I got to ride in the car right behind the hearse, and he had to ride in the second car behind the hearse, and he never forgave me. A little thing like that stopped brotherly love for 32 years. And that I heard witnessed years ago, but that struck me about the need for forgiveness. How many times have we spent avoiding people that have hurt us, and the resentment that sometimes we carry with us? And so often, the only people that really are hurt by this is ourselves. It limits that freedom that I was talking about last night. That willingness to forgive. That doesn't mean necessarily we're going to forget, but it means that we are going to be willing to forgive. And as Jesus said to the disciples one day, we have to forgive 70 times, 7 times. And I've said to myself, what does that mean? And I've come up with my own interpretation. And I think it means for me, anyways, that some people, I have to keep on forgiving them and forgiving them and forgiving them and forgiving them until it finally sinks in. And for some of us, it might take a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 20 or 30 years. But that sense of forgiveness is one of the ways in which we live out our faith, along with that sense of hospitality of welcoming others into our lives and at our table. It is that sense of compassion, of really careful concern of those around us. And so often we show compassion to a stranger, but we don't necessarily show compassion towards the people that live in our own home. What this is really doing, for me anyways, is it's a way of reflecting on that word discipleship. And that's what a theologian does. That's what you and I are called upon if we are theologians, and indeed we are. We reflect on those experiences that we have in light of the experience and the knowledge of the stories that we have heard and have read about Jesus. We start with our own experience of life, whatever that might be. That experience of our own hurts and frustrations, the experience of death and loneliness, the experience of hurt and frustration, the experience that we've had when someone has embraced us and welcomed us when we least expected us. Have you ever noticed how even a baby can be a source of a great experience in all of our lives? I've thought of it often because I don't think I can ever remember seeing a baby, and when a mom or a dad or even a stranger comes along, they'll look at that baby and they'll smile. And somehow, in some way, oftentimes it's the baby's innocent look or innocent cry or smile or movement of the body that just wants us to pick that child up and embrace it and protect it and care for it. You see, even a baby can help us to experience love, experience joy, experience tenderness, experience the possibility of making a fool out of ourselves. That's what we do when we reflect on the experiences of our daily life, if we want to be disciples in light of the stories we've heard about Jesus. Now, it's important, too, that to understand discipleship, we also then look at what we know about history and what we know about what it means to be a disciple. You see, in ancient days, before Christ even, a disciple was someone who was a learner, a seeker. And the disciple who was seeking knowledge or seeking a new way of life or seeking some knowledge of some kind or some wisdom, who wanted to really learn about it, would oftentimes go to a wise man or wise person and attach themselves. They would sometimes leave home and they'd come and they'd listen to what the teacher had to say because they were seeking knowledge, and then they just didn't go home at the end of the day like a lot of kids do now when they finish the school day, they go home. No, they would stay with the teacher and they would eat with him. And most oftentimes it was a male teacher, although we knew too certainly in Egypt and in parts of Greece, there were some women teachers who also were able to share their wisdom and their way of life with those who were seeking knowledge. And then the disciple would eat with his teacher, and they just wouldn't sit around and have pizza and beer. They would sit around and debate and ask questions and seek and argue. And the thing is, it was in the discussion, the dialogue that took place between the teacher and the disciple. It was that there was listening, there was talking, there was asking questions and reflecting back and forth. And oftentimes, too, then, not only would this be going on, but then later on in the day, the teacher would perhaps go home and he would say, well, why don't you come and stay the night or stay the week, and maybe we can continue this discussion. In other words, the disciple was someone who was seeking, but was also attached to a teacher who was willing to open up his or her life, not only to sharing a wisdom, but sharing a way of life, of discussion, of eating together. That sense of hospitality I was talking about earlier. The willingness to welcome the person into their home, model, see what their home was look like. The early RCIA was basically that, you know. That when people wanted to be baptized, what they would do is they would come and live with a Christian family. And they would spend time watching how they went to work, watch how they treated the people in the family, the discussion at table. And after they'd spent a couple of years living with this Christian family, the family would say, I think, you know, if you want to, you're about ready to be baptized. And people say, well, I like what I see. I want to be baptized. And then the Christian family would go down to the clergy and say, look, we witness to the fact that these people have been living with us. We've watched them. They've watched us. They like what they see about what it means to be a follower of Christ. They want to be baptized, and as far as we're concerned, having watched them over these last couple of years, we want them to be part of our community. They've got something to offer. They're willing to follow our way of life. That sense of discipleship. Now, Jesus, on the other hand, takes it one step further. As we heard in that first hymn, you know, will you come and follow me? But Jesus didn't say, will you come and follow me? He said, come follow me. That's a big order, isn't it? You know, if someone has said to you, come follow me, you might say, well, what are your credentials? Where are you taking me? Things like that. That's not what happened. These disciples, early disciples, followed Jesus. And as you know, they walked with him up and down mountains and hills, and they walked the whole distance from the northern part of Galilee down to Jerusalem. They really liked what they heard him say, and they were willing to leave their families to follow Jesus. And some of them were set aside to preach, and some of them were set aside to baptize. But whatever they were asked to do, they did it because they had this experience of living with Jesus. They had this experience of sharing in his life. That's why later on, when Jesus had died and was resurrected, when they decided they needed to fill Judas' place, they said, well, it has to be someone who had lived
with Jesus and followed him, one of the disciples who had that experience of Jesus. And that's how Matthias was chosen. Because living with Jesus and walking his way and observing and modeling themselves after the way that Jesus was living said an awful lot about what kind of leaders they would be. So what you and I have to ask then is, well, what quality would I have if I heard that, come follow me? Well, the only quality that I would say is, do I trust this guy? Do I trust him? And apparently the disciples did trust Jesus. They put their faith in Jesus. Because Jesus not only spoke, but he acted out the way in the different ways and invitations that he extended to people about how to live their life. But as you know, following Jesus was costly. And it means that I'm going to have to pick up my cross every day and follow him. And picking up the cross doesn't mean, necessarily we carry the cross, or these disciples carried a cross. But it's a way of speaking, because in Jesus' day, taking up your cross was very important, because if you took up a cross, it was a sign that Romans used to humiliate you, because you had to carry your cross through Main Street, and you didn't have any clothes on. You were laughed at and mocked. You were humiliated. That's the whole idea of carrying the cross. It wasn't just to be nailed to it, but it was a way of saying, we're going to humiliate you, we're going to mock you, we're going to reject you, we're going to make fun of you, we're going to spit at you. Why? Because if we decide to follow Jesus, Jesus is saying, don't expect everybody to love you. Don't expect everybody to respect you. You're going to be laughed at, you're going to be mocked, you're going to be exposed. So when the disciples heard that they had to pick up their cross daily and follow Jesus, that was a big order, and it was costly. But yet at the same time, notice what happens is they begin to discover what the meaning of life is all about. The meaning of life isn't having things. The meaning of life was not possessions. The meaning of life was not having power. But the meaning of life was really surrendering everything but your dreams, your vision. It was meaning that what I think is important is probably not as important as I thought. To surrender, to give up. To give up especially our way of thinking. And that's what Jesus said to Peter. He said, it's your way of thinking that's going to get you into trouble. You got to give up your way of thinking, and you have to put on my attitude. My attitude. And that's the meaning of life. The fullness of life is that oneness and that unity that you and I have with God. Remember one day that this young kid came and said, I want to follow you, Jesus. And in the gospel, I think it's in Mark looked at the kid and said to himself, I love this kid. He's just a beautiful kid. He's just wonderful. I could see all sorts of possibilities. And when Jesus says, well, fine, go sell what you have and give it to the poor, it was obeying the commandments was one thing, but I have to surrender the things that I have, the power, the material things. Well, the kid walked away sad. And Jesus in the gospel says, he's sad too, And there's almost tears in his eyes as he realizes that this is the way it's going to be. Not everybody's going to be able to accept this invitation. I often wonder whatever happened to the boy. I wonder if he died surrounded by things, or maybe later on in life he realized that that invitation that Jesus gave him was still there, and he decided to give up what he had and make the journey back to Jerusalem and become part of the Christian community. I think we have to use our imagination in some of these stories about Jesus. How did it all end up? How did the Good Samaritan end up? Whatever happened to the guy that was beaten up and the Good Samaritan took care of him? I wonder if the Good Samaritan just said, well, a person's got to do what a person's got to do. I wonder if the person that was beaten up and he found out that the Samaritan had helped him, whether possibility, maybe he began to look at Samaritans a little bit more kindly, maybe would even eat with them once in a while. Maybe the next time that he was on the road and he saw somebody in trouble, he might say, well, somebody helped me, I think I'm going to help them. I think that's where this discipleship in our tradition and using our own intellect and our own imagination can help you and me appreciate how we live our faith. And I think, for me anyways, we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be perfect. That's why we pick up our cross daily. We struggle every day. We get back out of bed. As I mentioned yesterday, every day is our yes, but every night is our thank you, with the hope and dream that we'll get up the next day and start all over again. When I was in college, the priest who was one of our teachers said to us one day, he says, when you go to the major seminary, he said, I'd suggest that you make the Stations of the Cross every day. That was just one of the things he said. And so I tucked that away. And when I got to St. Bernard's, I said, well, I think I'll try that. So every day for 6 years, I made the Stations of the Cross. And the ones that turned out to be my favorite, the 3 times that Jesus fell. Now, they're not very dramatic in the sense that, Mary isn't there, there's not a cross and all that, but falling 3 times. But what happened is Jesus always had the guts to get back up and take his cross and move on to the next station. Maybe that's what following Jesus is for me as a human being, for us who are still struggling with the dark side of us, the sinfulness, the pettiness that sometimes we live with, that we can pick up our cross and fall and get back up again. I think, isn't it, we've watched enough movies, who do we pull for? The underdog that gets beaten up and then gets back up on his or her feet and starts all over again, loses everything and comes back and becomes successful. Well, I think that's our role, is that we fall, we fail, we sin, but we get back up and we follow the Lord again. And for me anyways, again, that when I try to wrestle with that, I look for a story. And I still get back to that. It's important for us to learn stories. I was thinking today of St. Teresa of Lisieux, the feast we celebrate today. St. Teresa was a precocious kid at 15 who goes and says to the Pope, I want to be a Carmelite nun. Well, they were supposed to keep their mouth shut when they visited the Pope, but she's 15, and you're not going to keep a 15-year-old girl quiet, especially when she wants something. And I think it's a beautiful part where she says to the Pope, I want to be a Carmelite nun. And then she goes off to the convent, and she's only there for about 9 years before she dies. She dies at the age of 24. Now, in those days that she was canonized as quickly as she was, it was very much like Mother Teresa being made a blessed as quickly as she was. Because it was just that here's this Carmelite nun in the middle of France. Nobody knew much about her except the book that she wrote, her autobiography. But somehow or other, people were attracted to her way of becoming a saint. And it wasn't saying rosaries or extra masses or fasting or anything like that. But she became a saint simply by doing the little things and doing them well. When she dusted the chapel, she dusted it as well as she could. The story, of course, is the time when she was put in the sacristy and she had to clean the vessels, and she did it with great attention, making sure that it was nice and clean, making sure that the host was put on the paten, those kinds of little things. That was her way of becoming a saint, doing little things and doing them well. And you stop and think, isn't our day mostly little things? The way we start the coffee in the morning, or have our breakfast, it's a little thing. Or the way we pick up the paper, the way we greet people. I maintain that we can become saints by doing 3 things every single day, and it probably would take us less than 3 minutes. I think we can become a saint every day by doing, first of all, something simple for someone. It could be holding a door. It could be smiling at them. It could be letting someone into traffic. It could be any number of little things. It would take us a split second just to do something nice for someone. Secondly, I think it would take us probably less than 15 seconds to say hello, to make a telephone call perhaps, and leave a message, send a note off to someone, just writing them and telling them something, thank you. But if every day we just said something nice to somebody, number 2, did something nice for someone, and then thirdly, if every day we prayed for someone that we don't like or who doesn't like us. And sometimes it's, oh God, here she comes, help me. Or he comes. Or, oh Lord, she's calling again, or he's calling again. But that's a prayer. It's a prayer. But it's a more honest prayer, isn't it? Than, dear Lord, you are also good and wonderful, kind and gentle. Please help me to be kind and thoughtful. But if they, oh God, just help me to be nice to this person. She bugs me, or he bugs me. But those 3 things, that's what I mean by the little things that made Teresa a saint. That's what I'm saying is knowing those kinds of stories sort of encourages me. It should encourage us to try it out. So for me, the story that has been very helpful is the story of the 2 people from Emmaus who, after the death of Jesus, are going back home from Jerusalem to Emmaus, talking along the way. What happened? What happened? It's, I thought he was the Messiah. Here he is, crucified. Can't find nobody. He's not in the tomb. What's going on? Just this complete dejection, depression. And as they're going along, remember how Jesus comes along and starts talking to them. What's up? Oh, you're the only person in town that doesn't know what's up? Well, let us tell you what's up. And Jesus listens to them. Notice he listens to them. He pays attention to their depression, and he notices that they've got the story mixed up. They've got the story mixed up. They've got the wrong twist on Jesus. So he starts telling them the story beginning with Moses, and then going on through the prophets. And they begin to understand what the story really is all about. Oh, that's the way you see the story. That's the way it's to be heard. So they listen to the story as Jesus interprets it for them. And they're so excited and happy that he's joined them and he started talking. They say, hey, look, it's late. Why don't you stay over at our house, have something to eat? It was that Eastern hospitality of making sure that no one be out in the cold without a meal. And Jesus goes in and he's the guest, but about 2 minutes into the dinner, he becomes the host as he picks up bread and wine, blesses it, breaks it, and gives it to them. And they recognize him in the breaking of the bread. He disappears, and with excitement, they run back to Jerusalem because they felt something burning in their heart, and they just had to share that good news. What I'd like to just point out that too often we think we know what God's all about. We think we know what every story is about. We got our own interpretation. But maybe in our confusion and our depression and our wondering whether God knows what he's doing, we might just sort of say, hey, let's slow down and let's listen to how God is really telling this story, how he's unfolding or revealing himself in my life at this particular time. To take the scriptures anew and realizing that, maybe we've just given the wrong spin on God. It's fascinating. St. Augustine said one time, once we think we know everything about God, then we should realize we know nothing. And so when we think that we know exactly what God wants for us and for the world and for everybody else, we might just step back and say, is that what God wants, or is that what we want? And we're putting the words in God's mouth rather than let God's mouth speak to us. And realizing that as he's going along with them, he's telling them stories and showing them a different way of interpreting those stories, that their hearts begin to be set on fire. Remember last night I talked about this fire that dwells within all of us. And what we need is someone to fan it. We need to give it room so that it can start to glow and to take over. And so in a sense, when I look at that beautiful story of Jesus talking and listening, he first of all listened, then he spoke. And then they, because of their silence, they began to understand. And then in they began to understand they needed to invite Jesus into their lives, into their home. And once they were sitting around the table and they watched Jesus and he took the bread and the wine and gave it to them, they recognized that this same scene they had seen before. Jesus had done this lots of times when he welcomed the sinners, when he welcomed everybody into wherever he was eating. He would take bread and wine and break it and give it to the guests. We've eventually made it the Last Supper and the Eucharist, but apparently this ritual of Jesus was a part of many of his meals. What I'd like to suggest humbly is that in this story we have the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist, with even the same result, that with this experience of God's Word and the sharing and the breaking of the bread, we're so set on fire we have to go out and preach the good news to others and assure them that Jesus is alive and well. That's how we live our faith. We live our faith by realizing that discipleship is a journey. It's not something that is easy. Sometimes for any journey, we have to make sacrifices. Sometimes in any journey, we get lost. Sometimes we get depressed when things don't turn out the way we want them to. But so often in our lives, we find that in that getting lost and things not turning out the way we wanted them, we find a new life, and we're able to live that life a little bit differently, and I would dare say a little bit better. I think we live our life of faith by having a mentor, a guide in our life, be it our family member or friend, priest, whoever it might be, our study group, having someone that we can bounce off our journey and allow them to help us to get back on the right track. We need community. We need people around us. We need people that are going to be there for us. And you know, sometimes even when we come to Mass by ourselves on a Sunday morning, we might come very much alone in our own car, walk in by ourselves, but once we sit down, once we start singing and praying and just being with each other, we have that sense of community. And so it is, in a sense, not that we miss Mass, but we lose an opportunity to receive a beautiful gift and be a gift to those who are around us too. That it's a lifelong intention of ours to want to work at this. We have to study, we have to pray, we have to read the scriptures. It's a journey. Living our faith is not something that we do up until the time we receive the sacrament of confirmation, or the time we get married, or till we have our first child, or until somebody ends up in the hospital. But it is a lifelong journey. That's why I, not jokingly say, but I oftentimes think that if I were the Pope, I'd like to come up with an 8th sacrament. But that would be the older people in our parishes. They're an 8th sacrament. Because what are they? The visible sign of God's love. That they've struggled, they've had doubts and fears, and all sorts of things happen, but they're still here. They're still a sign of what God can do and does continue to do. They are a gift. They are the presence of God. They're a sign of God's continued love. That for all of us, the Eucharist is the place where we do come together for the breaking of the bread, but it's fed so that we can go out and proclaim the good news. That to live our faith, we have to keep on reflecting and listening. St. Benedict says in his rule, listen. Listen with your heart. Almost his first words. How many times can we live our faith if we just learn to listen to how God is calling us to respond? Do we let our imagination help us to discover the beauty of God in one another, in the stories, in the weather, in the different experiences of our daily life? But, you know, study and experiences are all wonderful things, and I really know that for me, that the study gets me thinking about new possibilities. But it is for me, and I think for all of us who are gathered here tonight, that basically our living our faith is in doing it. And it's always, could never be satisfied. There's another foot, there's another day, there's another year, there's another possibility, there's another way in which I can pray, there's another way in which I can welcome people. That sense of hospitality. There's so many people that are lonely. I remember years ago, when I was at another college campus, this kid, football player, 20 years of age, had a kitten in his room, and that was against the rules of the college. The college was big, maybe 3,000 people, if you included the staff and everybody else, maybe 3,500. So I said to him, Brian, you know the rule. Why are you doing this? You keep on getting caught, and they're going to throw you out. They're going to throw you out with the cat and everything else. He says, well, the cat is the only person around here that I can talk to who listens. Well, how many of us talk to our dog? But, just stop and think of that, how many lonely people there are. And so that sense of hospitality and warmth and compassion, that sense of forgiveness. Look at the world today and see the violence, all because we are unwilling to forgive one another. We have lots of ways that we can live our faith, and I leave it to you to make those choices. And maybe as a way of reflecting, we can stop and think of, who is Jesus in our life? How are we finding him? What can I do to make the life of my family better? The place where I work a little happier. The parish more exciting, more gifted, more sharing, whatever it might be. What is it that I need to care more about? Those are some questions that I leave you with, thinking about it, and perhaps reflecting, that's how I live this faith that I love.
Good evening. My name's Doug Escher, and I've asked to share a few thoughts on living our faith. And I'd like to thank Father Graff for helping us better understand the power of discipleship for all of us to continue to learn, be better disciples of Christ. When I got this request, I thought of a story that I thought was relative in living our faith. It goes with two birds sitting on a branch in the springtime. On one side is this beautiful red cardinal. The other is a gorgeous bluebird. And the cardinal looks at the blue jay and he says, "Blue jay, tell me, how much does a snowflake weigh?" The blue jay looks over and says, "What does a snowflake weigh? Well, it weighs nothing. It weighs absolutely nothing. It weighs nothing. It just doesn't matter." "Why do you ask?" And the cardinal goes, "Well, this time last year, in the wintertime, I sat on this branch and I looked over at that tree. And I started counting the snowflakes that landed on that tree. And it got to 1,234,567. And then the 1,234,568th snowflake landed and the branch broke. Yes, the branch broke with one snowflake that weighed nothing, weighed absolutely nothing, and mattered not at all. And they flew away. Well, what that story bears to me is, in living my faith, that branch is my life. For Jesus is the vine, and we're nothing but a branch. And every snowflake that comes down is a day in our lives. Now, I'm 64 years old. And I kind of realize I've got 23,414 snowflakes on my branch. And you're out there thinking, "Doug, you're getting a little worried." Well, the truth is, I looked at yesterday's obituaries in the paper. If you ever notice the Sundays, there's always a lot. And I noticed there's some people that were in there that had very few snowflakes on their branch. I found there were some that had a lot less than I had. Then it began, there's some that had about what I've got. And I started to get a little scared. And then there are some that have more than I have, and then there are some that have a lot more than I've got. So to remind me of that Monsignor Father Graff talked about, who was 96 years old at the front row, so we could learn more. I hope I have that many, because that means I got another 12,000 snowflakes to go. But the truth is, none of us know when that day is going to come. But we as Catholics, don't we have to live our lives like it could be today or it could be tomorrow? And living my faith brings me back to a story when it was the beginning of 2009 and the recession hit. Anybody remember the recession? Well, I've been in business for quite a few years, and I own a small company. My daughter and son work with me in it, and a few other folks, and I've never seen anything like this before. And it wasn't getting better. So it came late October, and I was praying because I had no answers. So I go in prayer to the Lord. He said, "Doug, go to daily Mass." Now, I'm a regular Catholic. I go Sundays, and I hit most holy days of obligation, and I get to confession, try to make my Easter duty every year, and maybe don't do that as well as I should. And I'm saying, "You want me to go to Mass every day? Try it." So with the support of my wife, and I got to tell you one thing, I've got a wonderful family. They're extremely supportive. And that's a blessing that I hope I always have. So I started coming. And you know, it was day after day after day. I'm not missing. I'm starting to recognize some people here, and I notice there are some people that attend Mass on a very regular basis. And for the first 6 months, it was all about me. I came there to find out what could I get to solve my problems. Then I'm not sure where I heard it. It could have been on the Catholic station, EWTN. It could have been in church. It could have been something I read, but it said, You got to live the Lord's life. You got to be able to give more and serve others. And if you could offer up Mass during that day, and if you can offer up communion, those are the things that we do that can really help others. So I said, that's the direction I need to go. So those are the things that I started to do, was found that Mass was a great way to give things. And because we often think we've got to give our money, we've got to physically get involved. Yes, that's important. There are ways to do that. But spiritually, there are some things that we can do through prayer and offer up things like our Mass and our Eucharist. And I'll tell you, for me, it made me feel like I'm doing something. Because we as Catholics were born, we're baptized, and as we die, we got three choices. We go to hell, then there's purgatory, and there's heaven. Well, I'm praying to God it isn't hell. I don't think I'm a good to go for heaven right away. I'm shooting for purgatory. Because I think purgatory, at least I've got a shot. At least I know then once we get to purgatory, we're going to be able to get to heaven. So all the things that I've been focusing on are things that, as Father Graff was saying, things we do in a discipleship manner that are for other people. And we try to do them as like no one else knows but God. I like the idea of these 3 tips, Father, of how to be a saint in 3 minutes a day. I took notes. I've got them down. And maybe I can buck up my chances of becoming a saint when I leave. But I'm not banking on it. What I also found in living my faith is I need inspiration. Where I found inspiration at Holy Cross, if you attend 7:30 Mass and Father Whalen walks out here, you probably notice he's got a couple of canes. And what it takes for him to get up these 3 steps to say Mass. And I know, I pop out of work, I pop out of my house into the car, and I bop over here, there's nothing to it. But the sacrifice that he has to make to come say our Mass for us. How he gets up these, you probably look at, is he going to make it? And he does. And the love in which, and the commitment he has to his vows so he could be there to say Mass for us is something that's very inspiring. And then later that night, if you're at a committee meeting and it's 9 or after, and you're ready to leave, and Father says, oh, I've got another hour or 2 things that I need to get done tonight. And he does that because he's a true servant. And he inspires us because he does it for the purpose to make this church, whatever it can be, to help us become better Catholics. And then there's Father Eisman, and now he's got 1 cane. I don't know if he's trying to keep up with Father Whelan or not. But this morning, and it was the talk was about the Lord, we have to have a childlike attitude. And then he said something that still echoes in my ears, says, but that doesn't mean you have to be childish. Oh, take all the fun out of it, Father. And he never leaves. When he ends the Mass, he's always going to, and he lets us know. And like a child with a commitment, he says, and go and live the gospel every minute, every moment of your life, and serve the Lord. I mean, he lets us have it. And I've been coming long enough that it's sinking in. And I got to thank Father for helping me because he does it so I can become better at living my faith. Then there's Father Reef. If you ever sat next to Father Reef, you get to be whoever you are and comfortable in your own skin when you're with Father. He makes you so relaxed and so good just to be a human being. And he's got a smile that I don't think it's this pollution we got that's melting the ice packs. I think it's a smile. I think he really has that genuineness of the human race, and he cares. And his wisdom that he gets to share, and he's got a ton of it, helps us become better at living our faith. And our staff, whether it be Sister Kathy, her commitment has been amazing, Ann Johnson, our staff, our volunteers, and what's so important, all of us as parishioners. I look out, I see so many friendly faces. And we're all here because we want to get, when we're died, to a place that's much better. And it's just an honor to have the opportunity to live faith with the parishioners of Holy Cross. I guess the good news is my business has turned around. I got a whole bunch of other problems, probably like everybody else. They don't go away, but I know where to go with them. And by living my faith, I just feel like I'm living a better life. So in closing, I'd like to say that today we each get one more snowflake. Let its weight be filled with faith so we can love it, we can live it, and we share it. And if we do, we'll live with the joy that only the Lord can give. Thank you.
Neither of you gentlemen make it easy to come up here and say thank you, because I don't know how you say thank you for the words that we heard this evening. I truly have been moved by them and want to thank Father Graff, to Doug, and to all of you for coming this evening. We hope you will join us tomorrow evening for the celebration of the Mass. If you have not already done so, we ask that you fill out the comment cards found in your program. There are also small sheets for you to write any prayer intentions you may have. These intentions will be presented at tomorrow evening's Mass. Both the comment cards and the prayer intentions may be placed in the baskets at the entrance to the church. There will be a collection at tomorrow evening's Mass, but if you wish to make a donation this evening, there are envelopes in your programs that you may put in the baskets at the entrances of the church. Thank you again for coming, and please be sure to stay and join us for some hospitality in the parish center immediately following. Our closing hymn will be number 669, the Servant Song, verses 1, 2, and 4.
Will you let me be your servant? Let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be